"You won't believe what I found at the animal shelter that day," Ryan Mitchell whispered to himself, barely able to contain his excitement as he pushed open the heavy glass doors of Paws and Claw's rescue. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the rows of kennels, and the scent of kibble and fresh bedding filled the air. Ryan had been dreaming about adopting a puppy for months, scrolling through countless online listings, but nothing had prepared him for the moment he laid eyes on Shadow. The small, scruffy creature was perched on the edge of a raised platform inside the kennel, its fur a patchwork of gray and cream with hints of something darker along its back. Its eyes were what caught him first, large, round, and almost too intelligent for a pup of its age. They followed him intently, a mix of curiosity and something else he couldn't quite place, a feeling that made the hair on his arms stand on end in the best possible way. Shadow's ears twitched as the other dogs barked and played, but he didn't join in. Instead, he sat perfectly still, observing every movement in the room, head tilting slightly, as if measuring the world around him. Ryan felt a shiver of anticipation run down his spine and took a cautious step closer, the kind of step that he had taken many times before with animals, but had never felt like this. The puppy stood and padded forward, paws making soft clicking sounds against the concrete floor, and stopped just a few feet away, tilting his head as though issuing a silent challenge or perhaps an invitation. Ryan's heart raced, excitement mingled with a small spark of unease, the sort of feeling that comes when you sense there is more than meets the eye. He knelt down on the cold floor, extending a hand slowly, and Shadow approached, sniffing carefully before brushing his tiny body against Ryan's palm. There was a strange energy between them, a silent understanding that this was no ordinary puppy. Something in the way Shadow's eyes locked with his own made Ryan's pulse quicken with both wonder and apprehension. The shelter volunteer, a young woman named Jessica, watched from the doorway and smiled faintly, sensing the connection before Ryan could even form the words to describe it. "He's special," she said softly, almost as if she were passing along a secret. Ryan laughed nervously, scratching behind Shadow's ears and feeling the puppy's tiny body vibrate with a kind of restrained energy that hinted at a story waiting to unfold. He could tell that Shadow had a presence, a quiet intensity that made the room feel charged, like something extraordinary was about to happen, and he felt an irresistible pull to take him home. As he filled out the adoption paperwork, Shadow sat patiently, tilting his head every so often to watch Ryan's pen move across the forms, eyes never leaving him for more than a second before returning to study his surroundings with precise attention. The volunteer handed Ryan a small leash and a crate, and he felt a thrill run through him at the thought of bringing Shadow into his home, not knowing yet the ways this tiny, seemingly unremarkable pup would turn his life upside down. Outside, the late sun painted the streets with a golden hue, and Ryan could feel the anticipation building in his chest as he carried Shadow to the car. The puppy's small paws made soft thuds on the pavement, each one echoing like a countdown to something monumental. Ryan whispered to Shadow, almost as if sharing a secret with him alone, "Let's see what adventures await us." Shadow tilted his head, ears flicking in a way that seemed to acknowledge the words, and Ryan felt the first stirrings of excitement and tension that would define the months to come. This was a moment suspended in time, a quiet, potent sense that something extraordinary was about to enter his life, and the way Shadow's eyes followed every movement, alert and calculating, left him with a feeling that this was only the beginning of a story far bigger than he could imagine. Ryan carefully secured Shadow in the crate in the back of his small SUV, feeling the puppy shift slightly with each bump in the road as they drove through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and pink, and the gentle hum of the tires on asphalt created a calming rhythm that contrasted with the bubbling excitement he felt inside. The car smelled faintly of leather and the lingering scent of wet grass from earlier walks, and Ryan found himself glancing back at Shadow through the rearview mirror, watching the way the puppy's head tilted slightly, as if it were observing the world with a knowing curiosity. When they arrived at his home, a modest two-story house on Elm Street with a small fenced yard and a picket gate that had seen better days, Ryan carried the crate carefully into the kitchen where the puppy would spend the first night, arranging soft blankets and a small toy in a corner so Shadow would have a comfortable space. Shadow stepped cautiously out of the crate, sniffing each corner with deliberate attention, occasionally lifting his paw to tap lightly at the floor, and Ryan noticed a subtle grace in his movements. The way he paused, listened, and adjusted his body as if he were measuring the environment carefully. Over the next several days, Ryan established a routine, taking Shadow out for walks each morning and evening, making sure he had fresh water, nutritious puppy food, and plenty of attention, but it became apparent quickly that Shadow was no ordinary dog. He would watch Ryan with an intensity that was almost unsettling, following him from room to room, sometimes standing perfectly still and staring at the doorway or windows as if anticipating something beyond human perception. Ryan began to notice small peculiarities in his behavior, like the way Shadow would tilt his head toward distant sounds, pause mid-step, or suddenly fixate on objects that seemed mundane to any other observer. The puppy had a habit of nudging Ryan gently with his nose when he appeared distracted, almost as though prompting him to pay attention to things he might otherwise overlook. Even during playtime in the backyard, Shadow would display an uncanny precision, moving with a calculated awareness that made Ryan pause in wonder. One afternoon, Ryan watched as Shadow approached the wooden fence at the far edge of the yard, nose to the slats, ears alert, and tail stiff, his body tense in a way that suggested focus and anticipation rather than simple curiosity. Ryan felt a twinge of unease, mixed with fascination, as the puppy's behavior seemed to signal something beyond ordinary observation, an intelligence and awareness that went far beyond what he had encountered in other animals. That night, as Ryan settled on the couch with a cup of tea, Shadow curled up at his feet, head resting on the carpet, eyes glinting in the dim light. And he could not shake the feeling that this small creature held secrets, that every glance, every tilt of the head, every subtle gesture was a piece of a puzzle he had not yet begun to understand. He began to take notes, jotting down times, locations, and behaviors, creating a mental map of Shadow's patterns, aware that each day brought a new layer of mystery. Even in the kitchen, during meals, Shadow would observe from the corner, ears pricking at sounds Ryan could not identify, occasionally emitting soft, almost human-like whines that seemed to communicate intent rather than mere need. The sense of anticipation in the house grew steadily, as Ryan felt the threads of a story weaving themselves through his daily life, a narrative that involved careful observation, intuition, and the quiet, compelling presence of a puppy who was anything but ordinary. By the end of the week, Ryan realized that he was living alongside something remarkable, a companion whose intelligence and perception challenged the boundaries of his understanding, and he felt a mixture of wonder, excitement, and a subtle tension that something important was on the verge of revealing itself, something that would test his perceptions and alter the rhythm of his life in ways he could not yet predict. Over the next few days, Ryan began to notice patterns in Shadow's behavior that both fascinated and unsettled him. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds, Shadow would sit by the front door, ears perked, eyes scanning the street outside with an intensity that made Ryan pause in curiosity. It was as if he were anticipating something, someone, or some event that only he could sense. During walks around the neighborhood, Shadow exhibited a similar attentiveness, stopping suddenly at intersections or turning sharply to follow sounds too subtle for Ryan to detect. The puppy's movements were deliberate, measured, and unlike anything Ryan had experienced with other dogs. It was the kind of focus that suggested understanding rather than instinct alone. In the evenings, when Ryan returned home from work, Shadow would meet him at the door, tail wagging in a controlled, almost calculated rhythm, then guide him to specific areas of the house, as though indicating points of interest. Ryan started keeping a small notebook to record each observation, noting the times, locations, and the reactions Shadow exhibited to various stimuli, from the rustling of leaves to the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. One afternoon, Shadow led Ryan to the backyard and began circling a particular spot repeatedly, pawing at the ground and tilting his head in a way that suggested urgency. Ryan crouched down to see what had captured the puppy's attention, expecting perhaps a stray leaf or an insect, but there was nothing visible. Shadow continued to stare intently at the same spot, ears twitching, nostrils flaring slightly as he took in scents Ryan could not detect. A sense of suspense built in the air, subtle but palpable, as if the house itself was waiting for something to unfold. Over the next week, Ryan began experimenting with different approaches, observing how Shadow reacted when he rearranged furniture, introduced new objects, or opened windows to allow in fresh air. The puppy's responses were consistently precise, almost predictive, indicating an intelligence and awareness beyond his age and size. At times, Shadow would nudge Ryan gently toward corners of the house or the yard where he had not yet focused attention, as if communicating silently, requiring interpretation rather than instruction. Ryan found himself both intrigued and cautious, realizing that Shadow's behavior suggested a depth of understanding and perception that he could neither fully explain nor ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the sky turned a deep purple, Shadow became unusually alert, moving from room to room with purpose, pausing by windows and doors, occasionally glancing toward Ryan as if seeking confirmation before resuming his careful investigation. Ryan followed, heart pounding, realizing that the puppy's attentiveness was leading him to discover things within the home and yard he had never noticed before, small details and subtle changes that had gone unnoticed until now. Shadow's focus was unwavering, and the bond between them deepened as Ryan began to trust the puppy's instincts, experiencing moments of wonder and anticipation that kept him constantly alert and engaged. Every sound, movement, and behavior became a potential clue, heightening the tension and the sense that something remarkable was emerging from the ordinary routine of daily life. Ryan could feel the excitement building within him, a mix of curiosity and anticipation, knowing that each day brought him closer to uncovering a truth that had been waiting quietly for Shadow to reveal, a revelation that would challenge everything he thought he understood about the small, enigmatic creature he had brought into his home. As night fell, the shadows lengthened across the floors, and Shadow curled up in a tight circle near the fireplace, eyes open and alert even in the dim light. Ryan realized that the coming days held the promise of discovery, suspense, and a profound connection that would change both their lives in ways he could not yet predict. As the week progressed, Ryan began to notice that Shadow's unusual behavior was becoming more pronounced and difficult to interpret. Early each morning, the puppy would sit by the kitchen window, ears perked and body tense, following every movement of the neighborhood with unwavering attention. Ryan found himself pausing mid-sip of his coffee to watch Shadow tilt his head in the direction of distant sounds that he could not hear, as though the puppy was reading the world in a language invisible to humans. During their walks, Shadow frequently stopped abruptly, staring intently at bushes, mailboxes, or the edges of driveways, sometimes moving forward slowly with a careful, deliberate gait, then retreating and circling back as if testing the environment for hidden patterns. Ryan became increasingly cautious, realizing that Shadow's behaviors were signaling more than simple curiosity. Each pause, each tilt of the head, and each small gesture seemed to carry a hidden message or warning. At home, Shadow would occasionally place his paws gently on Ryan's arm, guiding him toward particular areas of the house or yard, and Ryan began to see these movements as intentional, almost as though the puppy were pointing out details he had overlooked. On one afternoon, Shadow led Ryan to the side of the yard near an overgrown section of the fence, where the wind had shifted a loose panel slightly out of alignment. Shadow sniffed and circled the area, sitting back on his haunches to observe Ryan's reaction, then glanced toward the house, as if inviting him to investigate further. Ryan bent down and examined the gap, feeling a sense of anticipation and uncertainty building within him. Even the smallest movements of Shadow seemed loaded with meaning, from the way he would paw at an empty corner of the living room to the way he would pause mid-step and look over his shoulder as if ensuring Ryan was following correctly. The puppy's attention to detail created a sense of heightened awareness, and Ryan began to feel a mixture of awe and anxiety, aware that Shadow possessed perceptive abilities that were beyond what he had previously encountered in any pet. As evening settled, the warm glow of the setting sun illuminated the living room, casting long shadows across the floor, and Shadow moved carefully from room to room, observing and testing his surroundings, occasionally emitting soft, almost deliberate whines that seemed to communicate urgency rather than simple need. Ryan followed closely, noting patterns and subtle cues, aware that each action might hold significance he had not yet discerned. By the end of the day, he realized that Shadow had guided him to notice things he would never have seen otherwise, like a cracked floorboard in the hallway or a faint scent near the back gate. These discoveries, small as they were, left Ryan with a growing sense of anticipation, a quiet understanding that Shadow was preparing him for something far more significant than he could imagine. That night, as Ryan prepared for bed, Shadow lay curled near the foot of his bed, eyes open and alert, ears twitching at every sound from the street outside, and Ryan felt a deep sense of respect and curiosity for the puppy's perceptiveness, aware that their journey together was entering a new phase, one where mystery, revelation, and the unknown would soon demand his full attention and presence. As days turned into weeks, Ryan noticed that Shadow's behavior had evolved in subtle but unmistakable ways, revealing layers of complexity that kept him both intrigued and on edge. Each morning, Shadow would position himself near the front gate, ears twitching and eyes scanning the street with a precision that suggested he was tracking movements far beyond the ordinary. Ryan found himself following the puppy's gaze, trying to detect what had captured his attention, but often seeing nothing that would explain such intense focus. During their walks, Shadow began leading Ryan to specific corners of the neighborhood, pausing at certain fences and shrubs, occasionally sniffing the air with a discernment that suggested a familiarity with scents and sounds that Ryan could not recognize. At home, Shadow would exhibit unusual patterns, moving deliberately from room to room and occasionally stopping to inspect areas that had previously seemed ordinary, as though there were hidden elements only he could perceive. Ryan started to feel a mounting curiosity, realizing that each gesture, each pause, and each tilt of Shadow's head carried meaning, creating a pattern that was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. Shadow's responsiveness to subtle changes in the environment, from the soft creak of the floorboards to the distant hum of passing cars, reinforced the sense that the puppy possessed an intelligence and awareness far beyond his age and size. One afternoon, while Ryan was tidying the backyard, Shadow froze in the center of the lawn, tail held rigid, ears pricked, and gaze fixed on the corner of the property where a small shed leaned slightly to one side. He pawed lightly at the grass, then looked back at Ryan, almost as if urging him to investigate. Hesitant but compelled, Ryan walked toward the shed, noticing small details he had overlooked before, a loose board, a faint shimmer of sunlight reflecting off a hidden object, and an unusual scent that hinted at something unusual inside. Shadow remained perfectly still, eyes locked on Ryan, giving the impression that he was guarding the discovery until Ryan was fully aware of it. Over the next several days, Ryan kept detailed notes, observing the puppy's actions at various times of the day and under different conditions, noting patterns of alertness, reaction to subtle sounds, and precise movements that suggested a level of perception that was extraordinary. In the evenings, as Ryan prepared dinner, Shadow would patrol the perimeter of the house with methodical care, pausing to listen, to sniff, and occasionally to glance toward Ryan as though checking that he was following the cues correctly. The consistency of Shadow's attention, combined with his deliberate and precise actions, created an atmosphere of suspense, a sense that something significant was about to be revealed. Ryan felt a growing anticipation, a mixture of wonder and nervous excitement, aware that each day brought him closer to a revelation, a truth that Shadow was guiding him to uncover. The puppy's behaviors, once subtle, were now clearly leading Ryan toward an understanding, a sequence of discoveries and clues that promised to unravel the mystery surrounding Shadow and his unusual presence, keeping Ryan constantly alert and fully engaged in the unfolding story that was quietly taking shape within the walls of his home and the spaces surrounding it. One crisp morning, Ryan awoke to find Shadow already alert, sitting rigidly by the living room window, ears flicking as the wind carried distant sounds across the quiet neighborhood. There was an urgency in Shadow's posture that immediately pulled Ryan from his sleepiness, a subtle tension that he had learned to recognize as the precursor to a revelation. Shadow darted toward the backyard the moment Ryan opened the door, tail straight and eyes fixed on the overgrown corner near the shed where he had first noticed the unusual gap. Ryan followed quickly, heart racing. sensing that the puppy's attention was not arbitrary but directed with intent, as though guiding him towards something he needed to see. As they approached the corner, Shadow paused and barked softly, then pawed at a small object partially hidden under fallen leaves. Ryan knelt down, brushing the debris aside, and for the first time, a clear indication emerged of the mystery that had been quietly building over the weeks. The object was a container, small but sturdy, with markings that were unfamiliar and intriguing. Shadow circled it, sniffing with intensity, nudging it gently toward Ryan, and stepping back with a precise, almost deliberate hesitation. Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the container, feeling an electric mix of anticipation and caution. Inside, the contents revealed a remarkable anomaly, a carefully preserved miniature device, unlike anything he had encountered in his previous experiences with pets or typical household items. Shadow sat back, observing Ryan's reactions, eyes bright and intent, as though aware that he was witnessing a crucial moment of discovery. The puppy's behavior was calm but exact, every tilt of the head and gentle pawing seeming to communicate that this was significant, that Ryan needed to understand the implications fully. Ryan carefully examined the device, noticing subtle features, small components that suggested it had a function and purpose beyond mere curiosity. Shadow remained at his side, watching with unwavering attention, occasionally nudging the device slightly, drawing Ryan's focus to particular details that might otherwise have been overlooked. The clarity of Shadow's guidance made it evident that the puppy had led him to uncover this mystery deliberately, not by accident, and Ryan realized that the weeks of observation, the detailed notes, and careful attention to Shadow's patterns had prepared him for this moment. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting bright light across the backyard, Ryan experienced a mixture of awe, suspense, and a quiet exhilaration, understanding that the twist he had been moving toward was finally unfolding. Shadow's presence, calm yet intense, reinforced the sense of a revelation orchestrated with subtle precision, a culmination of curiosity, intelligence, and unspoken communication that had been quietly guiding Ryan along a path of discovery. Each second seemed to stretch with importance as he traced the contours of the device, absorbing the implications and possibilities that it represented. Shadow, still vigilant, nudged Ryan lightly, and in that small gesture, Ryan felt a profound acknowledgement of partnership, of shared awareness, and of a mystery that had been patiently waiting for the right moment to be revealed, bringing the weeks of suspense and meticulous observation to a singular, illuminating point of understanding. Ryan could hardly believe what he was witnessing as the true purpose of Shadow's guidance began to reveal itself. The small puppy, whose presence had seemed peculiar from the very first day, now appeared to be a deliberate and attentive companion, leading him step by step toward understanding something extraordinary within his own home. As Ryan studied the device, he realized it was more complex than he had initially imagined, with subtle mechanisms and features that required careful attention and patience to comprehend. Shadow sat quietly beside him, tail gently wagging, eyes locked onto Ryan's movements as if encouraging him to continue, signaling when to pause and when to proceed. The puppy's intuition seemed almost human in its clarity, a perfect partner in navigating the mystery that had quietly accumulated around them over the past weeks. Ryan felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and disbelief, as he traced the contours of the object, recognizing the ingenuity and precision that went into its design, marveling at the way every detail fit together with purpose. Shadow occasionally nudged the device gently with his nose, prompting Ryan to examine points he might have overlooked, and each nudge revealed yet another subtlety that added depth to the growing revelation. The sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the intricate features, casting delicate shadows that seemed to accentuate the hidden complexity of the object, and Ryan's excitement grew with each discovery, mingled with a heightened sense of responsibility to understand fully what he had uncovered. There was a sense of partnership, a silent communication between man and dog, that made every small adjustment and observation feel significant, as though the puppy was guiding Ryan's perception and ensuring that nothing escaped his attention. Ryan's thoughts raced, piecing together clues and anticipating the implications of each finding, realizing that Shadow's actions had been purposeful all along, orchestrating a path that would lead to this precise moment of understanding. The depth of the puppy's awareness left him humbled, a realization that intelligence and insight could manifest in ways far beyond what he had previously considered possible in an animal companion. The quiet attentiveness of Shadow created a calm yet electric atmosphere, one where discovery, anticipation, and careful observation merged into a single, heightened experience. As Ryan leaned closer, examining the final intricate details, a sense of connection solidified between him and Shadow, a recognition that the weeks of subtle guidance, careful observation, and growing trust had culminated in a profound revelation. The puppy's eyes reflected pride and focus, and Ryan could not help but smile, overwhelmed by a deep sense of wonder and respect for the small creature that had quietly orchestrated such a meticulous and enlightening path of discovery. It was a moment that combined shock, awe, and a gentle emotional release, the first true understanding of the significance behind Shadow's extraordinary behavior, leaving Ryan both exhilarated and profoundly grateful for the loyal and perceptive companion who had guided him through the mystery with unwavering precision and care. With the mystery now fully revealed before him, Ryan felt a mixture of relief, amazement, and profound gratitude wash over him, knowing that the weeks of observation, patience, and careful attention had led to this moment of understanding. Shadow, still sitting attentively at his side, nudged Ryan gently with his nose, as if acknowledging the completion of their shared journey and offering a quiet sense of pride in their teamwork. The puppy's eyes sparkled with awareness, and Ryan could not help but marvel at the depth of intelligence and perceptiveness he had witnessed in such a small creature. He carefully examined the device one last time, noting every intricate detail, and realized that Shadow's guidance had been both precise and deliberate, a silent communication that required him to engage fully with each clue and observation. The bond between them, strengthened through weeks of subtle guidance and attentive observation, now felt unbreakable, a partnership built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Ryan reflected on the countless mornings of anticipation, the afternoons of discovery, and the evenings spent following Shadow's intuitive guidance, each moment contributing to a heightened sense of awareness and understanding that he had never experienced before. Shadow's calm yet precise behavior had not only led to the discovery, but had also created an environment in which Ryan could explore, analyze, and ultimately comprehend the significance of what had been hidden in plain sight. There was a quiet joy in the room as Ryan gently stroked the puppy's fur, feeling a warmth that went beyond simple affection, an emotional resonance that spoke to the extraordinary journey they had shared. The air in the house seemed lighter, filled with a sense of accomplishment and emotional closure, and Ryan found himself smiling, eyes glistening with the realization of just how remarkable this journey had been. Shadow, sensing the shift in mood, relaxed slightly, curling up near Ryan's feet, but keeping his eyes bright and observant, a silent reminder that while the mystery had been uncovered, their connection remained dynamic and alive. Ryan felt a deep appreciation for the subtle cues, the nudges, and the attentive behaviors that had guided him to this point, understanding that the puppy's intelligence and intuition had been instrumental in shaping the experience, teaching him lessons in observation, patience, and the power of silent communication. The warm glow of the afternoon sun filled the room, casting gentle shadows that danced across the walls and floor, creating a serene backdrop for the emotional climax of their shared experience. Ryan took a deep breath, allowing the emotions of wonder, respect, and heartfelt admiration for Shadow to wash over him, recognizing that this journey had not only revealed the extraordinary nature of the small device, but had also illuminated the extraordinary bond between man and animal. There was a sense of completion, a feeling that the journey had reached its peak, yet the connection remained, vibrant and alive, a reminder of the intelligence, loyalty, and subtle guidance that Shadow had offered from the very beginning. As Ryan gently patted Shadow and whispered words of gratitude, he understood that the experience had transformed not only his understanding of the mysterious object, but also his appreciation for the remarkable abilities of the puppy who had quietly led him through an intricate and emotional path of discovery. leaving both of them forever changed by the journey they had shared. As the evening settled over Ryan's neighborhood, a calm sense of closure and warmth filled the house. The golden light from the setting sun spilling through the windows and illuminating Shadow's soft fur as he lay comfortably at Ryan's feet. The days of anticipation, observation, and subtle guidance had culminated in a profound understanding, a revelation that not only solved the mystery, but deepened the bond between man and puppy in ways Ryan could not have anticipated. He reflected on the journey they had shared, from the first encounter at the shelter to the weeks of careful attention, noting how every pause, nudge, and watchful glance from Shadow had been intentional, guiding him toward a discovery that revealed both intelligence and trust in the smallest of companions. Ryan realized that the experience had reshaped his perception of connection and awareness, highlighting how an attentive and perceptive animal could communicate in ways that transcended ordinary understanding, creating an unspoken partnership that required observation, patience, and mutual respect. The quiet house seemed to embrace the sense of accomplishment, each shadow and corner of the rooms echoing the meticulous guidance that had led to this moment of catharsis. Shadow lifted his head occasionally, eyes bright, ears flicking as if to remind Ryan that while the mystery was resolved, their connection remained dynamic and alive, a continuous dialogue of understanding without words. Ryan gently stroked the puppy, feeling a deep gratitude for the subtle intelligence and intuition that had guided him through weeks of suspense and anticipation. Recognizing that Shadow had taught him lessons in attention, perception, and the quiet power of observation. There was a profound emotional resonance in the room, a sense of admiration and awe that combined with the relief of uncovering the truth, leaving Ryan with a gentle, lasting sense of wonder. He thought of all the moments when he had questioned what Shadow might see or sense, understanding now that the puppy's keen awareness had been the key to unlocking a larger reality hidden within the ordinary, a revelation that had transformed both their lives. The warmth in Ryan's chest was matched by the calm presence of Shadow, who, though small and seemingly ordinary, had demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for guidance and connection, a reminder that insight and intelligence can manifest in unexpected forms. As night fell and the last rays of light faded, Ryan settled into a comfortable chair, Shadow curling beside him in quiet companionship, the house imbued with a sense of completion, reflection,